An unexpected encounter. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She just didn't know he had. Joanna lived a predictable and quiet routine. At 45 years old, divorced and childless, her days were filled with long hours at the accounting office and lonely nights in her small apartment. Her life consisted of quick dinners, TV shows, and most importantly, Korean dramas. Those romantic dramas were the perfect escape from the monotony of her existence, bringing a bit of excitement to a heart unaccustomed to grand adventures. That rainy night, Joanna was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, as the melancholic music of a drama echoed through the room. On the screen, a couple was saying a tearful goodbye, a poignant scene that made her eyes glisten with a mix of emotion and envy. Ah, if only I could live something like that someday, she thought. But soon, her phone alarm went off, reminding her that the next morning would bring another day, just like all the others. The next morning, Joanna got off the subway as usual, headphones playing a romantic soundtrack while her eyes were glued to her phone. In her haste, she didn't notice the young man walking in the opposite direction. The collision was inevitable. She felt herself stumble as her phone slipped from her hands and hit the ground with a dry thud. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you," she exclaimed, bending down to pick up her phone. But the young man was already in front of her. He bent down quickly and grabbed it before she could. As he handed it back, their eyes met. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. He was handsome, young, with delicate but striking features, and a shy smile that made him look like a character from her favorite dramas. "It's okay. It was my fault," he said in accented English. Joanna blinked, stunned, as she took the phone from his hands. "Thank you," she murmured, not knowing what else to say. Before she could collect herself, he smiled again and continued on his way, disappearing into the bustling crowd. Joanna stood frozen for a few seconds, staring at the space where he had been. Who was he? She thought, as a strange sensation, a mix of curiosity and enchantment began to rise within her. She had no idea that brief encounter would change everything. 2 days later, Joanna walked into the cafe she visited every morning before work. It was her favorite moment of the day, a peaceful break where she enjoyed her coffee and organized her thoughts. That simple routine brought her a sense of calm she couldn't find anywhere else. As she searched for an empty table, her eyes landed on a familiar figure. There he was, the same young man from the subway. Sitting in a corner with a laptop open and a notebook beside him, he was sketching something with intense concentration, his fingers absent-mindedly running through his hair. Joanna paused for a moment, surprised. It was an improbable reunion. Her heart raced and she hesitated. She could just pretend not to see him and sit elsewhere. But something urged her to approach. "Excuse me," she began, her voice soft but hesitant. "We bumped into each other on the subway the other day, remember?" He looked up, surprised by the interruption. For a moment, he seemed to be trying to recall, but then he smiled. "Yes, of course. Are you okay?" She nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. "I'm fine. That day, I didn't even get to properly apologize for the accident." He chuckled lightly. "No problem. It was just an accident." His warm smile felt like an invitation. Before she realized it, Joanna asked if she could sit down. He nodded and gestured to the chair across from him. "My name is Minjun, and yours?" he asked as he closed his notebook and set it aside. "Joanna. I work nearby at an accounting office. What about you? Have you been to this cafe before?" "It's my first time, but I like the macchiato. I think it's the best I've had here." The conversation started slowly, with the usual small talk, but soon it flowed naturally. Minjun, with a serene smile, explained that he was an illustrator and had been in the country for just over a year thanks to a scholarship to study fine arts. "Fine arts?" Joanna asked, leaning slightly forward, curious. "Yes, it's a fascinating field. It goes beyond just drawing or painting. It involves learning traditional techniques, like oil painting and sculpture, and also exploring concepts of aesthetics, composition, and even art history. We learn to interpret the world visually and create something that moves people," Minjun explained, gesturing softly as he spoke, as if drawing in the air. Joanna, now more at ease, admitted that she knew a little about Korean culture thanks to the dramas she loved to watch. He smiled at that. Ah, dramas. A lot of people enjoy them. I've seen a few. They really know how to hold your attention. They continued talking, unaware of how much time had passed. They chatted about Korean food, places he recommended visiting in Korea, and even music. Nothing too personal, but enough to make the meeting light and enjoyable. Joanna glanced at her phone and widened her eyes. Several messages from her boss flashed on the screen. She was 40 minutes late for work, something that never happened. "I need to go," she said, hurriedly standing up. "It was great running into you again." He smiled. "The pleasure was mine. I hope we meet again." Joanna almost ran out, her heart racing. Throughout the day, she found herself constantly thinking about him, his smile, the conversation, the carefree way he seemed to view the world. Meanwhile, Minjun returned to his notebook, but he couldn't focus. The image of Joanna and their conversation lingered in his mind. There was something special about her, though he couldn't quite understand what. In the days that followed, Joanna tried to return to her routine, but something inside her had changed. During her shifts at the office, she often caught herself distracted, her thoughts drifting to Minjun's smile and the lightness of their conversation. It was strange. A single encounter shouldn't have had such an impact. Yet every time she thought of his calm expression, her heart seemed to race. At the cafe, Joanna returned to her morning ritual, but now her eyes unconsciously searched for Minjun. She didn't expect to see him again, but a small part of her wished he would appear. It was only on the third day that her wish came true. When she opened the cafe door and heard the bell ring, Joanna saw him. He was seated at the same table as before, with his notebook open and a cup of coffee in front of him. As soon as he saw her enter, Minjun lifted his head and smiled. It wasn't the casual smile of someone recognizing a familiar face. It was something more genuine, as if he had been waiting for her. Joanna hesitated. Something in her chest fluttered. She walked to the counter, ordered her coffee, and pretended to be busy rearranging the papers in her bag. But before she could escape to another table, she heard his voice. "Good morning, Joanna," he said lightly, his tone brimming with enthusiasm. "Looks like we have the same taste in cafes." She smiled, trying to hide her nervousness. "Good morning, Minjun. It seems we do. I think I might become a regular, just to enjoy this macchiato," he replied, a playful sparkle in his eyes. The invitation to sit came from him, and she accepted. The conversation flowed easily once again, but this time it felt more personal. He asked about her job, whether it was something she enjoyed, while Joanna struggled to stay focused. Minjun's presence had the peculiar effect of scattering her thoughts. When she finally glanced at the clock, she realized she was about to be late again. She quickly said goodbye, but not before Minjun said something that echoed in her mind for the rest of the day. "See you tomorrow?" Joanna didn't reply, but the smile she carried for the rest of her walk to work was enough to show how much she liked the idea. At the office, however, things were different. Joanna felt the weight of the formal environment, the pressure to deliver results, and her boss's constant demands. Her mind floated between spreadsheets and memories of her encounters with Minjun. During lunch, Karen, her best friend and co-worker, noticed her distracted behavior. Karen was the opposite of Joanna, outgoing, optimistic, and unafraid to speak her mind. "Okay, spill it. What's going on?" Karen asked with a curious smile, biting into an apple. Joanna tried to play it off, but Karen's expression said she wouldn't accept excuses. "It's nothing." Joanna started, then sighed. "All right, I met someone." Karen's eyes widened, both surprised and excited. "Wait a minute. You met someone? Like, in the real world?" "Yes, Karen, in the real world. It was a random meeting." Joanna recounted everything, from the bump on the subway to their conversations at the cafe. Karen listened intently, growing more animated with each detail. "He sounds amazing. And he's Korean? Joanna, this is straight out of a drama." "Karen, it's just a coincidence. He's much younger than me, and so what? He clearly likes talking to you, and he's obviously going to the cafe to see you. Plus, you can't stop thinking about him. That's what matters." Karen grabbed Joanna's hand and gave her a serious look. "You deserve this. Don't sabotage yourself. Joanna smiled, grateful for her friend's encouragement, though her doubts lingered. The next morning, Joanna walked into the cafe with her heart racing. She knew she would see him again, but she wasn't sure how she felt about it. As expected, Minjun was there, at the same table, with the same warm smile. But this time, something felt different. He had brought a small package, and when he saw her, he stood up to hand it to her. "Good morning. I brought something for you." Joanna accepted it, surprised. Opening the package, she found a small assortment of Korean sweets and a note that read, "A piece of Korea for you to experience." Her heart raced. For the first time, she felt like this was more than just a casual encounter. The next morning, Joanna walked into the cafe, already expecting to see him. And there he was, sitting at the same table as always, with his notebook open and a cup of coffee beside it. As soon as he saw her, Minjun looked up and smiled, as if that moment were the highlight of his day. This time, he had already pulled out the chair across from him before she could even say a word. "I thought you wouldn't come today," he said playfully. Joanna laughed, setting her bag on the chair and ordering her coffee. There was something comforting about this newly formed routine, as if this small habit had brought new color to her life. As they talked, Joanna took the opportunity to ask more about Minjun. He spoke about his life in South Korea, mentioned his family, and, in the middle of the conversation, Joanna asked a question that left her curious. "How old are you, Minjun?" He laughed before answering, as if finding the question unexpected. 27. Why? Joanna froze for a second. He was younger than she had imagined, and the age difference between them suddenly felt immense. She tried to hide her reaction, but something in her face changed, and Minjun noticed. "Is there a problem?" he asked, curious but with a calm voice. No, she said quickly, trying to push the thoughts aside. "I just thought, well, you seem older." He smiled but didn't appear offended. "I guess it's the way I am. My mom always says I'm too mature for my age." Joanna forced a smile, but her mind was in turmoil. She was 45. 18 years separated her from this young man. The thought began to weigh on her more than she wanted. Trying to change the subject, she asked about his studies, and Minjun, always willing to share, spoke naturally. "Before coming here, I graduated in business administration. It was something my family wanted, but I never felt connected to it. After a few years, I decided to pursue what I truly love, illustrating, creating. That's why I came here." Joanna listened intently, admiring his courage to change his life. "That's inspiring," she said sincerely. "A lot of people don't have the courage to follow what they really love." He smiled, tilting his head slightly, as if reflecting on her words. "I think deep down, we all want to find something that makes life worthwhile." The conversation continued on a light note, but inside Joanna, the conflict was beginning to grow. Minjun seemed so young, so full of energy and possibilities, while she... At work, Joanna was visibly distracted. Karen noticed immediately and, during lunch, pulled her aside to a more private spot. "You're thinking about the Korean guy again, aren't you?" Karen asked, her tone teasing but full of intention. Joanna sighed, resting her face in her hands. "Karen, he's 27. 27! Karen raised her eyebrows but kept her smile. "So what? You're overthinking this. Age is just a number, Joanna." "It's not just that. He's young. He has an entire life ahead of him. I've already passed the phase of dreaming, of starting over." Karen grabbed her hand, speaking firmly. "Look, you have the right to be happy, no matter what society thinks. He likes you. That's obvious. And honestly, I don't see why you shouldn't give it a chance." Joanna tried to smile, but her thoughts remained tangled. The next morning, Joanna met Minjun at the cafe as usual. Once again, he had brought something for her, a small book filled with his illustrations. "I made this inspired by our conversations," he explained, handing her the gift. Joanna opened the book and was captivated by the drawings. They were scenes from the cafe, the city, little details she hadn't even realized he had noticed. "Minjun, this is amazing. Thank you." He smiled but seemed to be waiting for something more. When he finally spoke, his question was straightforward. "Why do you always seem worried when we're together?" Joanna hesitated. She wanted to talk about the age difference, about her doubts and fears, but the words wouldn't come. I guess I'm just not used to this, to feeling this way. Minjun didn't press further, but his gaze was understanding. He held her hand for a moment and with a soft smile said, "You don't need to worry. I'm here." In the days that followed, Joanna couldn't stop thinking about her moments with Minjun. The gift he had given her, the small book of illustrations, was carefully placed on her bedside table, a reminder of something special and unexpected in her life. While organizing papers at work, an idea came to her. It felt only fair to return his gesture, but she wanted something personal, something that showed she had been paying attention to. Joanna had a hobby she had cherished since her youth: photography. During college, she used to wander around the city with a simple analog camera, capturing unique moments from the streets, architectural details, and people. She had never considered pursuing art professionally, but the images she captured carried a piece of her soul. Among the many photos stored in albums and boxes, there was one in particular, a nighttime cityscape illuminated by lights that always brought her peace. That morning, before leaving for work, she chose that photograph. She placed it in a simple yet elegant frame and brought it with her to the cafe, knowing she would find Minjun there. Joanna arrived a few minutes early and sat at the table that now seemed reserved for them, with the photograph carefully wrapped. When he entered and saw her, the smile he gave was enough to make her heart skip a beat. "You're early today," he said, pulling out the chair. "Something special?" She laughed nervously and slid the small package toward him. "For you. I thought I should return the favor." Minjun looked surprised but took the package carefully. When he opened it, his eyes lit up as he gazed at the photograph. He was silent for a few seconds, taking in every detail of the image. "This is incredible, Joanna. Did you take this?" She nodded, smiling shyly. "Yes, back in college. I used to wander the city with my camera. It's always been a hobby, but I never thought about pursuing it professionally. I'm better with numbers." Minjun looked at her with admiration. "It doesn't feel like just a hobby. This has soul. Thank you for sharing this with me." Joanna felt her face flush. Minjun seemed genuinely moved, and it made her feel confident in her choice of gift. They continued talking, with Joanna explaining how photography had always been a creative outlet for her, while her work in accounting was her true vocation. "I know it's not the most glamorous job," she said, laughing, "but I like what I do, even if the pace can be exhausting sometimes." Minjun nodded, as if he understood perfectly. "I think it's important to find something we enjoy, even if it's not easy every day. Honestly, I think it's amazing how you balance it all." Joanna laughed. "You talk as if I'm special." He tilted his head slightly, his eyes shining. "Because you are." Joanna felt her heart race. Before she could respond, Minjun smiled and shifted the tone of their conversation. "You know, I was thinking," he began, his tone casual but tinged with expectation. "How about we do something different?" "Different how?" she asked, curious. "Friday night, I want to take you to an authentic Korean restaurant. A friend of mine, Jae-won, is the chef and owner. I think you'll like it." Joanna hesitated for just a moment. The idea of a date outside the cafe made her nervous, but at the same time, it felt impossible to refuse. "I'd love to." Minjun smiled, clearly pleased. "Great, Friday at 7. Before Joanna could reply, he pulled his phone out of his pocket and held it out to her naturally. "Here, put your number in. That way, we can talk if there's any issue." She took the phone, a little nervous, but typed her number in with a shy smile. Handing it back, she felt a slight thrill at how unexpectedly intimate the gesture was. "Done. Now you can remind me in case I forget," she joked. "I doubt you'll forget," he replied, laughing lightly. Later at work, while going through the day's reports, Joanna heard her phone buzz. Picking it up, she saw a message from Minjun. "Hi, Joanna, don't forget. Friday, 7 p.m. She smiled, shaking her head. It was a simple message, but it made her feel something new and unexpected. That was the first of many messages they exchanged over the following days. The conversation never seemed to run out. Minjun sent photos of the city, capturing little details he found interesting. One photo showed a brightly lit bridge at night, accompanied by a note. I saw this and thought it would look beautiful in one of your photos. Don't you think? At other times, he shared images of his drawings and works in progress, asking for her opinion. What do you think of this sketch? It's for a class project, but I'm not sure if it's good enough. Joanna always responded enthusiastically, praising his talent. With each exchange, she felt a deeper connection forming, and without even realizing it, the thought of Friday's dinner no longer seemed so daunting. The day of the long-awaited dinner had finally arrived. Although they had already met at the cafe that morning, a ritual that had now become part of their routines, Joanna couldn't shake her nervousness. Joanna was more anxious than she cared to admit. She had chosen a modest yet elegant dress, taking care not to seem overly eager. When she arrived at the restaurant, Minjun was already waiting outside. He wore a light blue shirt, simple, but one that only enhanced his natural charm. "You look beautiful," he said, with a smile that made her blush. They went inside, and the restaurant's atmosphere was warm and inviting, with soft lights and a delicious aroma filling the air. Jae-won, Minjun's friend, greeted them personally. He was a lively man with an infectious energy, immediately making Joanna feel at ease. "I hope you enjoy the food," Jae-won said, smiling. "Minjun speaks very highly of you." Joanna looked at Minjun, surprised. "Really?" Minjun shrugged, feigning indifference. "Maybe I mentioned you once or twice." They laughed and moved to their table, where Jae-won brought out traditional Korean dishes. Minjun explained each one, and Joanna felt transported into his culture. As the evening progressed, their conversation grew more personal. Minjun shared stories about his childhood in Korea, while Joanna spoke about the challenges of balancing work and personal life. At one point, while explaining the meaning behind a dish, Minjun lightly brushed her hand as he gestured. It was a casual, almost imperceptible touch, but it made Joanna hold her breath. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. Joanna felt a warmth rise in her cheeks but managed to smile. "So am I." The night continued with laughter, exchanged glances, and a growing sense that this was more than just a dinner. After dinner, Minjun insisted on walking Joanna to the taxi stand. The night was calm, and a gentle breeze made the city lights feel even more welcoming. As they walked side by side, he glanced at her with a serene smile and without a word intertwined his fingers with hers. The simple gesture, yet so full of meaning, made Joanna pause for a moment. His hand was warm and firm, and the touch conveyed a sense of security. At the same time, a wave of fear swept over her. Walking hand in hand with Minjun felt like the most natural thing in the world. But what if someone saw? What if they judged? More importantly, what did this mean? Minjun noticed her slight hesitation but didn't let go of her hand. "I feel at home when I'm with you," he said, breaking the silence. Joanna looked at him, surprised, but couldn't find the words to respond. They walked in silence for a few more steps until the distant sound of soft music and rhythmic drums caught their attention. In a nearby plaza, a small group of performers was putting on a show. They stopped to watch, still holding hands. Joanna observed the graceful movements of the dancers, but her mind was elsewhere. "Sometimes I wonder what I'm doing," she said suddenly. Minjun turned to her, curious. "What do you mean?" "I like these moments. I like being with you. But at the same time, I'm scared. Scared of getting too attached, of getting hurt, or of—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Minjun gently squeezed her hand as if to offer reassurance. "I'm scared too, Joanna. But I think we can't let fear stop us from living. Don't you think?" She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. For the first time, she felt she could trust him completely. Minjun insisted on accompanying her by taxi to her building. During the ride, their conversation flowed naturally. They talked about dreams, places they wanted to visit, and even childhood memories. As he spoke, he held her hand again, casually playing with her fingers as if it were something they'd always done. "I never imagined I'd meet someone like you here," he said in a low voice. Joanna felt her face warm. "And what am I like?" she asked, trying to keep the tone light. He smiled, leaning in slightly closer to her. Someone who makes me want to stay. The car stopped in front of her building, but neither seemed ready to say goodbye. Minjun opened the door but remained seated, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "I had a wonderful night, Joanna," he said, leaning in slowly to kiss her. Before he could, a voice interrupted them. "Good evening, Joanna," a neighbor called out, her curious eyes on the scene. Joanna quickly pulled away, trying to hide her nervousness. Minjun chuckled softly. "Looks like that's my cue to leave," he said, with an amused smile. Joanna simply nodded, said goodbye, and entered the building with her heart pounding. Over the weekend, Minjun sent messages inviting Joanna to go out again, but she declined. Not because she didn't want to see him, but because fear was beginning to take hold of her. She spent the days trying to keep herself busy, but everything seemed to lead back to him. Their conversations, his touch, the way he made her feel. She knew that the more she got involved, the harder it would be to step away. When Monday came, they met again at the cafe. Minjun didn't seem bothered by her weekend refusals. On the contrary, his warm smile showed just how much he cherished every moment they spent together. As they talked, he shared more about his family. "My dad always wanted me to take over the family business. We have a small handmade paper factory. It's a traditional craft in Korea, but I never saw myself working there." "Handmade paper? That must be beautiful work," Joanna said, intrigued. "It is. My parents have made a good life with it, but I wanted something that was mine. Something I could create." Joanna admired Minjun's determination to follow his dreams. Each conversation made it clearer how special he was. Their meetings at the cafe became more intimate, and Joanna felt that Minjun understood her in a way no one else could. However, things began to change as her colleagues' curious looks grew more frequent. At work, the whispers in the hallways became increasingly audible. One day, as she grabbed a coffee from the machine, she clearly overheard two co-workers talking. "Did you see Joanna with that guy from the cafe? Isn't he too young for her?" one whispered, loud enough for Joanna to hear. "Young and foreign. He's totally not her type. It must just be a phase," the other replied, laughing quietly. Joanna tried to ignore them, but their words echoed in her mind. The discomfort grew even stronger when a closer colleague made a comment that seemed friendly but carried an undertone of judgment. "So, Joanna, is the Korean guy from the cafe good at talking, or does he have other qualities?" he said, winking provocatively. She forced a smile, but her face burned with embarrassment. The next day at the cafe felt different. Joanna avoided looking at Minjun as she placed her order. He greeted her warmly, as always, but she quickly averted her eyes. Before he could strike up a conversation, she murmured a quick "thank you" and left in a hurry. Minjun followed her outside. "Joanna, wait!" he called, gently grabbing her arm. She stopped but couldn't bring herself to look at him. "What's going on? Why are you avoiding me?" Joanna sighed, finally meeting his gaze. "Minjun, people talk about the age difference, about how it doesn't make sense, and that—" She hesitated. He interrupted her, gently cupping her face with his hands. "I don't care what they say. To me, age doesn't mean anything. What matters is how I feel when I'm with you." Joanna's heart raced. Before she could respond, Minjun pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was a deep kiss, filled with emotions and certainty. In that moment, all her doubts seemed to melt away, leaving only the warmth of the moment and the connection they shared. The kiss they shared left no room for doubt. In that moment, Joanna felt all the barriers she had built in her mind come crashing down. Minjun was sincere in his feelings, and she couldn't deny how much that gesture meant. But after the intensity of the moment, reflection crept in. Over the following days, Joanna wavered between the happiness of being with him and the fear of what it could mean for her life. At the cafe, their meetings continued. Now, the touch of hands and spontaneous kisses had become part of their routine, and their shared glances spoke more than words ever could. Minjun seemed eager to cherish every second with her, while Joanna grappled with the flood of emotions. "I want to take you somewhere special," Minjun said one morning. Joanna smiled, intrigued. "Where?" "It's a surprise. Just trust me." The idea left her anxious but also excited. On the appointed day, Minjun brought Joanna to a small art studio. It was a cozy space with walls covered in paintings and sketches, and a faint scent of paint and wood lingered in the air. "This is where I spend most of my time," he explained, opening a door to reveal his workspace. Joanna looked around, admiring the attention to detail. There were sketches scattered across the desk and unfinished canvases propped against the walls. "This is incredible, Minjun. It's like seeing a part of you I didn't know," she said, awe evident in her voice. He smiled, picking up one of the drawings and showing it to her. "I drew this after our dinner at the restaurant." It was a delicate sketch of a woman walking under soft lights, her expression serene and mysterious. Joanna immediately recognized the familiar features. "Is this me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. You're my greatest inspiration." Joanna felt her cheeks warm, but the comment left her with a mix of surprise and admiration. Minjun was so genuine in his feelings that it was impossible not to feel special. Despite the magical moments, Joanna still faced the stares and comments from those around her. At work, Karen noticed her unease and decided to step in. "Joanna, what's going on? You seem happy, but also worried." Joanna sighed, setting her pen down on the desk. "Karen, I don't know what to do. People stare. They make comments. The age difference. The fact that he's so young." Karen crossed her arms, her gaze firm. "Joanna, have you thought that you're giving way too much importance to what other people think? Minjun seems like an amazing guy. You've said yourself he's genuine, that he makes you happy. Why let others ruin that? Because it's complicated. It's not just about me. It's about him too." Karen leaned in, taking Joanna's hand. "Joanna, love is never simple, but if you already know how you feel, why not fight for it?" After reflecting on Karen's words, Joanna decided she needed to be honest with herself and Minjun. That same evening, as they walked together through the city, she stopped and turned to face him. "Minjun, I need to talk about something." He turned to her, his expression calm but attentive. "Of course, what is it?" Joanna took a deep breath. "I worry about what people think. I know I shouldn't, but..." Before she could finish, he held her hands firmly. "I know this isn't easy for you, but for me, what matters is how we feel. The rest, it doesn't mean anything." She looked at him, feeling completely disarmed. Minjun had a unique ability to simplify everything she overcomplicated in her mind. "You make it seem so easy," she said, smiling faintly. "It's not easy, but it's worth it." Joanna knew he was right. For the first time, she felt that maybe it was time to set her fears aside and allow herself to live something real. Joanna and Minjun continued living their connection intensely, but during a relaxed moment at the cafe, Minjun brought up a topic Joanna wasn't prepared to hear. "Joanna, have you ever thought about taking a vacation?" he asked, stirring his cappuccino. Joanna furrowed her brow, a bit surprised. "Vacation? Well, it's been a while since I took one. Why?" Minjun smiled, his eyes shining. "Because I thought it would be amazing if we traveled together. Maybe to Korea. I'd love to show you the place where I grew up." For a moment, Joanna was speechless. The idea of traveling with Minjun was both thrilling and terrifying. "Korea?" she repeated nervously. "Minjun, that sounds wonderful, but I don't know if it's a good idea." His smile faltered slightly, but his expression remained understanding. "Why not?" Joanna sighed, resting her cup on the table. "Because it's a lot. What if your family doesn't accept me? What if..." Minjun gently interrupted. "My family is very easygoing, Joanna. They'll love you." "I don't know, Minjun. I think people wouldn't understand." He leaned closer, taking her hand. "Are you talking about people or yourself?" Joanna felt the weight of his question. He knew her well enough to pinpoint her insecurities. After their conversation, Joanna returned to work, but her mind was occupied with comments she had overheard earlier that morning from a colleague. "So, Joanna, I heard you're dating that younger guy from the cafe. Must be fun, huh?" The tone seemed friendly, but the insinuation behind the words deeply unsettled her. She tried focusing on the report in front of her, but the words echoed in her mind as if they had been said much louder. Later, while getting coffee in the break room, another comment emerged, this time more direct and laced with malice. He must be great at shaking up your routine, huh? After all, someone your age doesn't get that lucky every day. Joanna froze momentarily, gripping her coffee cup. She tried to smile it off, but inside she felt a mixture of anger and humiliation. The comments grew more frequent each day. It was as if her relationship with Minjun had become the office's favorite topic, and everyone felt entitled to their opinion. Sometimes, she overheard muffled giggles as she walked down the hallways. Other times, it was curious or condescending glances that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. The workplace, which had previously been exhausting due to its workload, now felt suffocating. Each joke and insinuation made Joanna question whether she could keep going without breaking down. One particularly difficult afternoon, while reviewing an important document, she overheard another conversation near her desk. She must be living a fairy tale, huh? With that young, handsome Korean guy. Bet it's just fun for him. Joanna stayed silent. The next morning, when they met at the cafe, Joanna was noticeably distant. Minjun picked up on it immediately. "Joanna, what's wrong?" She shook her head, trying to dodge the question. "Nothing, just a bad day at work." But Minjun wasn't convinced. After they left the cafe, he gently grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Joanna, please, tell me what's going on." She hesitated, but finally let it out. "People are talking, Minjun. They comment on our age difference, about how it doesn't make sense. And that—" She trailed off. He interrupted, holding her face gently with his hands. "I don't care what they say. To me, age doesn't mean anything. What matters is how I feel when I'm with you." After a few days of silence, Joanna received a message from Minjun. It was a photo of a peaceful spot with a park bench surrounded by blooming trees. The message read, "I'll be here at 7. I hope you will be too." Joanna hesitated, but by the end of the day she decided to go. When she arrived, she found Minjun sitting on the bench, calm yet determined. "I don't want to pressure you, Joanna, but I also don't want to give up on you," he said. She sat next to him, unsure of what to say. I don't want to hurt you, Minjun." He smiled softly and took her hand. "Then don't. Stay with me." This time, Joanna didn't reply with words. She simply interlocked her fingers with his, leaned in slowly, and kissed him gently on the lips. It was a soft gesture, but one filled with emotion. Minjun kissed her back tenderly, as if to say, without words, that he was all in. When they pulled apart, Joanna kept her eyes on his and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was making the right decision to accept that sometimes love is worth the risk. The weekend arrived with radiant sunshine, and Joanna felt as though even the weather reflected her new outlook on life. She and Minjun spent the days together, savoring every moment to the fullest. On Saturday, they strolled through the park, talking about everything and laughing at small, silly details. Minjun held her hand firmly, as if to remind her that he was there and she never had to doubt it. They had lunch at a charming restaurant, sharing dishes while Minjun explained bits of Korean culture. On Sunday, he took her to a small outdoor festival. Joanna had never danced in public before, but Minjun insisted, and his relaxed demeanor eventually convinced her. They danced, laughed, and snapped photos, capturing each moment like a treasure. At the end of the day, sitting on a bench by the lake, Joanna realized that something within her had changed. She felt confident, secure in the love they shared, and sure it was enough to face anything together. "I have something to tell you," she said, turning to him. "What is it?" Minjun asked, curious. Joanna took a deep breath and smiled. "I called my mom today. I told her about us." His eyes widened in surprise, but his face lit up with happiness. "And what did she say?" "She said I deserve to be happy, and that when we come back from Korea, she wants to meet you." Minjun chuckled softly and pulled her into a hug. "I think I'm going to like your mom." They decided they would make the trip the following month during Minjun's vacation. Joanna, who had accumulated leave, knew she could take the time off whenever needed. The excitement of planning the trip and the prospect of visiting Korea by his side filled her with joy. Despite the happiness in her relationship, Joanna still faced challenges at work. The murmurs from colleagues, once subtle, had become openly mocking comments, as if her personal life were public property. One particularly tough morning, as she organized reports, she overheard a group of coworkers laughing. "The Korean boyfriend must be a great distraction, huh?" joked John, chuckling. "And with that age gap, it's probably more like a hobby," added Mary, teasing. Joanna felt her blood boil. She had always been reserved, avoiding confrontation, but something inside her snapped. She stood up, walked to the center of the office, and with a firm tone said, "That's enough. You don't know anything about my life. You judge me because I'm happy, but maybe you should take a look at yourselves." Silence fell instantly. Everyone stopped, shocked by her outburst. Joanna turned to Mary. "Mary, you love to make jokes, but everyone knows your husband is leaving you, and not even for someone else." She then looked at John. "And John, you've been single longer than anyone here, yet you think you're entitled to judge me?" Joanna continued, addressing each person who had made malicious comments, exposing truths she had never voiced before. Finally, she took a deep breath and added, "I've never commented on your lives. I never tried to humiliate anyone. But today, you crossed the line. So, I'll say this one last time. Be happy and stop worrying about my life." She returned to her desk and sat down, feeling as though a massive weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Karen, who had been watching everything, stood up and added, "That's right. Who do you think you are? Joanna has more courage and authenticity than all of you combined. Maybe that's why you're so interested in attacking her." The office remained silent for the rest of the day. After that incident, the comments stopped completely. Joanna finally felt like she could live her happiness without fear. The following month arrived quickly, and Joanna found herself on a plane heading to South Korea. Beside her, Minjun spoke enthusiastically about the places he wanted to show her: the majestic Gyeongbogung Palace, the traditional Bukchon Hanak village, the Ensol Tower with its stunning view, and the romantic Lovelock Bridge. He also mentioned the paradise-like Jeju Island and the impressive Haenyeo, the women divers. Joanna listened, enchanted by his excitement, already imagining the experiences they would share and feeling that this trip would be unforgettable. When they arrived, Minjun took Joanna to meet his family. Joanna was nervous, adjusting her coat repeatedly as they walked to the door. When they entered, they were greeted with warm hugs and kind smiles that quickly eased her tension. Minjun's mother, a woman with delicate features and a watchful gaze, brought out tea and fruit while asking questions about the trip. Her tone was kind, but Joanna could feel the weight of each word, as if she were being assessed. Minjun's father, on the other hand, was more reserved. He observed quietly, but as dinner progressed and Joanna shared stories about her life in the United States, he began to open up, laughing at some of her anecdotes about cultural differences. "Minjun never stops talking about you," said his mother, smiling conspiratorially as she placed more food on Joanna's plate. "And now we understand why," added his father, his tone carrying subtle but sincere approval. Although they were initially surprised by the age difference, Minjun's parents seemed genuinely impressed by the way she made their son happy. By the end of the evening, Joanna felt much more at ease, laughing along with them and realizing that, despite cultural differences, this was a home filled with warmth and love. During dinner, Minjun's father spoke about the family's handmade paper factory. He showed Joanna samples of the products and explained the traditional process. Joanna was fascinated and commented, "It's beautiful to see how you keep such a tradition alive." Minjun's mother smiled and replied, "And it's beautiful to see how my son has found someone who values that." In the days that followed, Joanna and Minjun explored Korea together. He took her to ancient temples, bustling markets, and breathtaking landscapes. At each place, Joanna felt like she was diving into a piece of his life, while Minjun made a point of including her in everything. On their last night, as they walked across an illuminated bridge, Minjun stopped and held her hands. "Joanna, I never thought I'd find someone like you. You've changed my life." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "And you've taught me that it's never too late to start over." They kissed under the bridge's lights, bars with the river shimmering behind them. It was the beginning of a new journey together, where love, trust, and happiness were all that mattered. I hope you've lived every moment of this emotional story, filled with love, challenges, and triumph. Following Joanna's journey from her unexpected encounter with Minjun, through her internal struggles, to the beautiful connection that brought them to Korea, has shown us that true love can overcome any barrier. If this story touched your heart and you want to discover other inspiring narratives, like the video and subscribe to the Stories for You channel. Here, every storyline is crafted to move you and make you reflect. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments and send us your ideas for new adventures. Your participation means the world to us. Thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next journey.